Eventually, Gerald tells him to shut up and calls him foul space vermin for teasing Shadow sarcastically. So this gets dragged out too, as he's told about the fastest Eggman double-cross ever and sees Eggman be racist against Shadow for being a hedgehog. Which is on the nose and unnecessary when we already know he's evil. Most of the early other versions of Eggman did look down on non-humans, so this is how he's supposed to be. But in the game, his reaction to Shadow is just a service to Shadow, who the game was about, because he said this is impossible about the idea of a hedgehog besides Sonic trying to ruin his plans. That he thought Shadow was as fearless and heroic as him. So he should keep it to himself in this case. After some more padding that amounts to nothing, he finds out Knuckles and Tails are tied up in the trap chamber with him. So eventually, Sonic just says he's glad to see them because he thought he was in really big trouble until just now, even though they're tied up anyways. He looks like an idiot. You'd think Knuckles would be able to heat up his knuckles to melt the rope tying him up. He has some limited firepower, but that would require them to research his abilities. So eventually, Gerald claims to have a sympathetic goal to use the energy of these heroes to build a beacon of salvation for all of humanity, although that's really vague. We all assumed he was going to try to destroy the world anyways, so this is a pointless lie meta-wise. But it makes sense that Eggman wouldn't go with that if he was told about it right away. But since he's been depressed lately, and when Eggman was depressed lately in SCC, he tried to destroy the world, it could have made sense that he wanted to go along with it as a punishment to humanity. Eventually, Gerald denies that the lab accident was his own fault, but he never explains how it actually wasn't anyways. And just whines a bunch predictably before saying that Gunn wanted to create a super weapon with Shadow. And there's more predictable monologuing after that. It was more emotionally impactful in the game, because the first we see of Gerald is him just telling everyone on Earth they'll be destroyed and waiting until the very end to just give a vague excuse that they took away everything from him and made him deal with a loss. It's scarier when you don't know why he's doing it. There was much less dry exposition in that. They aren't experiencing diary entries of his where he was nice, which was a change of pace. This is just a cliche villain monologue at the cliche time and situation, because the villain's still alive and talking to them directly, and he's probably more emotional about it than Shadow. I was already told about Shadow's past so many times in the story. The speech only gets interesting when he says that what kept him alive was just a combination of the chaos energies absorbed from Shadow's quills and his grief. I hope he said that term in the movie. It's interesting that he can get immortality from it, and Shadow is immortal after all. But why would he think his grief would keep him alive when the extra stress would be doing the opposite? And why didn't he get given grief counseling? Even prisoners have access to a therapist in there. After decades of wondering how to get his revenge, because unlike Game Gerald, he was too stupid to have immediately figured that out, he eventually says that he told Gunny to make a super weapon for them in exchange for his freedom, the Eclipse Cannon, which he admits is going to be used against Gunn, where he handed the idiot ball so they could trust him to do that. Joe clicks his fingers together, and above them a giant hologram of a laser-powered satellite appears. The narration doesn't need to say it's laser-powered, because eventually Gerald explains that anyways. And eventually Knuckles calls it cowardly nonsense, which makes sense because he was raised by close-range fighters. Tails should have known from this response that he already assumed it was a space laser. And it goes back to padding, where of course Gerald takes the key to the Eclipse Cannon from the tied-up Sonic. Which again would never happen, he would have just thrown it into the river. Eventually it's revealed out of nowhere that there's actually a second launch key, and it's in the gun headquarters in London. Why is there a second key if they never thought there'd be anyone trying to activate the cannon illegally who could do so? Why won't the keys just be with the president? It's so obvious the key's just being used as replacement Chaos Emeralds. Well, it's good to have a new experience and a new story. It's just that it's barely new at all because they're only used for one thing. Well, the emeralds were needed to stop time as well. And obviously emeralds are better looking than keys. This is just the corner the writer wrote himself into by having the emeralds be fused with the Master Emerald so that they can't be all over the world to be collected. Why is Gerald asking if Eggman would like to join him when he already made it clear he liked him? He just wasted his time and the audience's. It wasn't surprising at all that Eggman went to his side. Eggman just ends up recapping to us everything we already know about Gerald, which pathetically tries to make you think he's against him. But since he agrees to work for him, it's really because he's so impressed that he's stunned by it. I hate the constant repetition of exposition in these films. I don't know how anyone gives that a pass when it's so insulting. The writers think their films are so boring to the audience that they're gonna forget the exposition repeatedly and compensate. Then don't have the pacing suck. Eventually, Gerald says the heroes will be killed in a chaos-powered vortex that'll destroy this place, and he throws a drone between the heroes. And Sonic ends up telling Shadow he still has a choice to not help the bad guys. It makes sense that he'd do this out of desperation when it looks like there's no other option. To be fair, maybe he knows how unlikely it is to work. Eventually, after the drone makes a black hole in the room's center, when I already saw that in Sonic Riders Zero Gravity, so the only thing impressive is that it came from a drone this time. Eventually, Sonic rolls his body until the force of the vortex slides him into his friends, and Knuckles plants one fist into the metal floor. I assumed it was metal. Eventually, after it says they only had seconds to go, Knuckles should know better than to waste some of those seconds asking sarcastically if Sonic's plan was to push them towards their doom. Tails would have taken until after Sonic said 2 lines before offering his friends rings from his tails. Eventually the ring gets caught in the vortex and is swirling above their heads. So after the heroes waste even more time talking, Knuckles gets told to let go and says the weird phrase for Knuckles, "as you wish," and bravely says they'll be sucked to their fate with honor. And Tails does a countdown for when Knuckles is supposed to let go, even though Knuckles had no way of anticipating that. I thought he wanted him to let go before the countdown, so Knuckles would have let go too early. Instead, the chapter ends before that. There's a bunch of narration pointlessly recapping Tails' life, so it goes from exciting action to utter boredom. After it says he helped fight the mecha, it says that he built a plane from scratch. That must have been off screen and after that fight. It eventually says that Tails had worried that the heroes cleaning up renegade robots in the town dump would get them in trouble somehow. After he used to be rejected by everyone, it makes sense that he'd be scared that the Wachowskis wouldn't want him around if he blew another crater in their house, like the one that happened after they got sent back to their dining room. After redundancy, it says the dishes were shattered, and they had scattered the puzzle all over the house. Eventually, after Sonic says he somehow needs their help on a mission because the world's in danger, Tom says thank God, with God being non-capitalized. So again, in-universe he's a polytheist, and meta-wise it's censorship. Maddie happily agrees to the idea of the two risking their lives to go on a mission they have no reason to think they could be helpful on, since he didn't explain it. Naturally, Tails lampshades their excitement and lack of a speech about responsibility. And eventually Maddie says they loved them and that it was getting boring here without them. I'd already read on TV Tropes that the film itself had a whole subplot about Tom and Maddie trying out a bunch of hobbies, like baking bread and knitting. That was a padding and mundane scene, but it would have been seeing stuff happen. So I'd rather see that than most of the story's contents. That would have been better than reading most of the dialogue, like at that fork in the road. There was creative effort involved in coming up with all those ideas. And after a while of padding where it's revealed that Tails knows where Gun headquarters is because of the copying he did of Gun's files, and makes a holographic map of it. After more padding, I wonder why the Gun headquarters is in London instead of America. But at least that's creative. And it goes back to a bunch of boring talking, giving us exposition we would have discovered anyways after they got there. So it's just padding. Of course there's a security system, so Sonic can't just run in and out of there. Eventually Tails says that they have to shut down the security while Sonic waits far away. Sonic somehow assumes he's joking at a time like this, and when corrected, he whines about it. Tails gets to call him out that he'd trigger a lockdown otherwise, but keeps blathering, and Sonic eventually agrees that waiting sounds good. Eventually Tails explains that the reason they don't warp into the vault with a ring is that Gun wiped their database of whatever footage they have inside of the vault, and reminds him if they can't picture what a place looks like, they can't warp there. Something Gun knew about, which is why they did the wipe. So that's smart of them. Maddie recaps what exposition we just got, because the writers think we're idiots. She lampshades that the plan would be a whole lot easier if they just used the Master Emerald to let Sonic go super to get in there. Impossibly, the heroes refuse to do so and think the emeralds wouldn't be safe with an invincible Super Sonic. Eventually Knuckles refers to the idea as using the emerald for selfish gains. To be fair, they don't know that the world's gonna be destroyed if they don't. It should have been written that the emerald was accidentally warped to another world in a fight and no one knows where. Eggman could have wiped their memory of that, and wanted it warped there because at least they wouldn't have it, and he'd think he was the only one smart enough to invent his way into getting the emeralds back from there. Don't even bring it up if you aren't going to justify it properly while you're not having the characters act like real people. Anyone smart will ask what Maddie did anyways. Knuckles strangled Sonic in the last movie. Sonic stole a whole bunch of things from people. I refuse to believe that these are the kind of people that would be so responsible they would think the Master Emerald should never be used for selfish gains. There's a lot more padding after this, like more narration that talks from Eggman's perspective, which means talking way too much in a way that doesn't encourage my attention. Eventually it starts describing how Eggman used virtual reality with Gerald to fast forward through missed bonding time. They rode a tandem bike and kicked any of the kids they saw into the river. They held a graduation ceremony and Gerald delivered the commencement speech. They played a Christmas morning with Eggman in a green and red onesie sitting on Gerald, who's probably in a Santa outfit. None of this is in character for Eggman. But it's new. It took creative effort to come up with all of that. It's not really like Gerald either anymore, but it makes sense that he would just do this to humor him, to keep him on his side. The fact remains though, these two aren't supposed to be characters the audience sympathizes with and roots for. So why waste all that time on this? I don't know why it's seen as that heartwarming when it's villains who are doing this. There's more padding where the narration thinks of Stone as becoming needy lately because he wants to get in on robbing a candy store with Gerald. And Eggman tells him no for no reason. Well, it could be because he told Sonic Eggman had depression. That should have been explained in the narration. Gerald calling what they did together shenanigans should have given away early that he was only humoring Eggman and doesn't care about him. That he didn't enjoy any of it. Why should he? Eggman's clearly evil if he had his own weaponized drones to steal. He tells him to join him in the command center. And there's even more padding because they're going to talk about their plan. And Shadow cathartically tells Eggman to get to the point in his blathering. Eggman ends up calling Shadow a demon hamster. And eventually they start walking through the fog towards the headquarters. And Eggman happily talks to a camera mounted on one of the drones flying near them, telling his streaming fans that he's back with his grandpa. Eventually Stone says he's got only 7 followers. Since Eggman's been hiding his identity and is pure evil, that's realistic. His only followers would be people who don't get that he's not being satirical or just as bad as him. Shadow lampshades that this is a waste of time and wants to just go in and out of there. Gerald reassures Shadow and states the obvious about why he's being as stupid as Sonic. I expect him to be a bit smarter than Sonic. Eggman tells him he's got an IQ less than 12. In the game, Eggman was nothing but respectful to Shadow and vice versa, which kept both of them from looking like idiots. How would they expect their partnership to last otherwise? And eventually it says that Eggman plans on Gerald and himself using invisibility leotards. Why can't it just say cloaks? This is so out of character. The invisible part's cool, but there's a whole paragraph trying to make Eggman look lame, and way lamer than he is in the games for no reason. Eventually there's a whole bunch of boredom. Like Sonic somehow saying he's been waiting all day when he just started. And the heroes asking each other if they're ready and replying the whole page. Tom says we're ready with as much 80s action hero gravel as possible and gets an eye roll, and asks Tom to believe that was too much. I like that moment, because they're trying to make a joke at his expense. Eventually, Tails shockingly reveals that Knuckles' assignment is to punch the glass of the giant clock in London in case of an emergency. What emergency could possibly justify that? People would have to pay for it. Well, at least it's Tails making the plan. But I didn't point it out right away because it was common sense that he would, and that's just it being accurate to the games. There's no way anyone else would have made such an intricate plan. I'll compliment the plan itself, but no kidding with Tails. And part of the way it keeps dragging on is that Knuckles keeps saying in formal ways that he'll break that glass as hard as he can, while he keeps being told it's only for emergency. He's just being mocked for no reason and possibly stupid, like Boom Knuckles. He had something going for him last time, he was still cool. Knuckles is even more chipper in this film, so how is he any different from Boom Knuckles? Eventually Sonic says Knuckles gets it, and the narration heavy-handedly states the obvious that Tom's put at ease by this, and thinks he makes them all good people. What a moron. Just because a thief is nice to his friends doesn't mean he's good. Eventually Tom presses a button Tails affixes to his jacket as the humans are disguised as gun agents. And with a flicker of light, a hologram of a new face hides Tom's identity. And it happens for Maddie too. It keeps wasting time until explaining that Maddie and Tom were disguised as Rachel and her husband. That should have been explained instantly. And after a while, the guard of the headquarters asks Maddie if she works there. This makes Tails seem stupid in case Rachel doesn't. After a while, Maddie's sassiness is all it takes to convince the guard to let them in. He should know who works there. Eventually, Maddie makes herself look like Rockwell to get access to the server room. And after padding, there's a tense moment where Rockwell walks down the hall with agents around her. So Maddie has to temporarily switch to Rachel's face. Eventually, Maddie gets to the security servers and uses the USB drive. Tails says he's in from the other side of their earpieces. And Tom ends up calling him Buddy in front of a screen that flashes through every security camera in the place. People would wonder why the cameras started going out. As for why they already had the technology to disguise themselves as gun agents, Tails is just really well prepared. He just knew that they would have to deal with this eventually. Because Gun bothered them before. Maybe he thought someone would get kidnapped by Gun. Eventually, Tails says he's deactivated the speed sensors outside, which is competent of him, and says he's working on the inside traps now. So that's how Tails should be. Then he says this is strange and ends up complaining that the heat emitters are popping off at random, and the elevator fan blades are overworking. So it's like two ghosts in the machine making trouble where Sonic's supposed to run. And eventually Maddie says there's another USB plugged in with a mustache on it. I read that there was a cringy dance scene between the two Robotniks in the film, so I'm glad I didn't get to see them getting to the vault. Eventually, Tails warns Sonic that the Robotniks are almost at the vault door, which eventually starts getting tech attached to it. So the story takes a while to explain Sonic's long trip there instead of him just going there instantly. This wastes a bunch of time explaining the exact famous London areas he went through. It ends up saying he carried out a suit of armor from the palace just to surprise the guards. What a jerk. He's still removing people's possessions just for fun, and now there's no excuse. Manic had an excuse. He was a fugitive anyways. He couldn't have possibly gotten a job. You know, as completely pointless as it seems that they have to go to Tokyo and then London when they didn't in the game, it's there to preserve the globe-trotting aspect of the game. It doesn't do it nearly as much as it was supposed to, so I don't appreciate it as much, but at least it tried. and eventually he runs into the headquarters, and at some point fans blow him upwards towards some spinning blades and spikes. There's a cringy line that's like someone programmed a giant game meant to stop him, and eventually Tails says to him that he's got to disable the full security system first. Then why did you tell him about the robotics being at the vault door before that? It's all Tails' fault if things go wrong. For no reason at all, Sonic ignores Tails as if he's got no respect for him, pulling a lost world with the conch kicking all over again. He said that waiting sounded good, so he sorta promised he wouldn't do this. He eventually sees the Robotniks in what's lampshaded as ridiculous outfits with drones nearby. And in the round chamber is a glowing steel orb. It just had the key. Why an orb? Also, I guess the drones made themselves really small and hid in their clothes, because otherwise you'd think that the drones would be caught on camera as well, because they don't have invisibility leotards. Eventually the Robotniks jump into the vault, revealing that Sonic just stood beside them for seconds, politely listening to Eggman when he could have attacked them to ruin their plan. They stumble to the floor of the vault and stuck like glue. Eventually Sonic swirls in super speeds to the ceiling, and crosses into the vault at an angle only he could achieve, and taunts them, before he ends up swimming in the air. So how do they expect Shadow to get to them? I guess the USB with the mustache was meant to disable the security system just enough that Shadow could catch up with them. Eventually, Rockwell with a bunch of guards behind her explains to them that the vault's got variable gravity, which is creative. She uses a button and her boots light up floor tiles that let her walk with ease past everyone and pick up the orb. Removes the launch key from it and leaves the vault. Eventually, after boring, lifeless dialogue from her, and Eggman stupidly saying that trickery doesn't count as genius, Rockwell says the uncharacteristically silly line, "Shut your mustache," and goes back to her lifeless monologuing. There's just no possible way that could make this sound intimidating. She says nobody actually had the power to shut down the security system. Then why would Shadow be able to make it here? Why is the writer demeaning Tails? Eventually Sonic decides to signal Knuckles to burst through the wall, bringing shards of the building's no longer protected glass surface with him. Eventually, with the commotion of a crumbling building and Rockwell's guards shooting lasers, she dropped her control device, which could only happen from a falling part of the building hitting her, or at least explain that one of the guards bumped into her. And Sonic and the Robotniks get normal gravity again just from that drop, so the device must have been damaged. But even tablets that random people have don't get destroyed just from one drop to the floor. Sonic rushes to the side of his family and starts to undo their cuffs. Apparently Tom was in front of him all along, so he tells him to go for the key. Sonic would rather make sure he's safe and risk them making off with the key that could do who knows how much damage. But he is confident, so it would only be because he thinks he could stop the plan anyways. Eventually Tom transforms his face and runs ahead. Eventually it says Knuckles blasted back shot after shot from the agents, but it doesn't explain how when he doesn't have a projectile weapon. How can you punch back lasers? I guess he did get a gun. There's no reason to think that his gloves would be immune to lasers. At some point, Eggman uses buttons to bring his drone back under his control. It describes that long-windedly. Sonic jumps between the two teams of bad guys, and eventually another face enters the scene. A Bruce Walters, who eventually causes Rockwell to give him the key and tells her guards to retreat with her. Eventually Tom reveals that he disguised himself as Walters. For no apparent reason, he returns to looking just like someone Shadow wants to kill, even though he doesn't plan on staying close to Rockwell. And Rockwell's not gonna look behind her. He's just gonna follow her while she's not looking ahead, so he could just look like Randall. He doesn't even have to keep staying close to her while going down the same hallway that she does. Another hole bursts into the building, and eventually this is said to be because of Shadow. Eventually, Shadow confronts Tom, and Tom stupidly wastes his time saying no and you don't understand, instead of instantly saying I'm Tom and trying to use the face switcher. With one supercharged punch to the floor, Shadow sends a shockwave of broken concrete and chaos energy at Tom, slamming him to the ground with what the narrator lies about as deadly force. Shadow would have punched or kicked him. You're not going to tell me that he wouldn't want the catharsis of direct force on the person he wanted revenge on the most. But he did use it on random people. They literally only had him use a shockwave so he could deal more damage. But he would have punched him and then used the shockwave. And again, Tom would still be looking like Walter, so while this is an emotionally impactful moment, it's just a cheat of the writing to force it to happen. Which is why it should have been called soap opera drama. I think the reason they had him look like Walters is because they thought maybe it would be redeemable of him to attack Tom, just because he thought he was working for Gunn. He would have attacked Tom anyways. Eventually it says Shadow felt sorry for Sonic, out of character for the bully he is. And after a while, Shadow warps away to the entrance to the vault, where Gerald was taunting agents with a drone. I guess he can only warp to places he's seen. So even if you don't assume that he only has short-range teleportation, that's why he doesn't just warp any of the heroes to a volcano and drop them into it. After a little padding, the narration has Shadow think of Gerald as unhinged for wanting the same revenge as him. Well, that's confusing to write. How is he able to support the goal if he's able to judge it? This is even more emphasized in the movie. I've heard people say that Gerald said that it doesn't matter what Maria wants because they killed her. There's a reason that in the game's canon, Shadow only wanted to destroy the world because Gerald brainwashed him to think that Maria wanted that by cutting out some of his memory. It's less evil looking than just doing it for yourself because you want revenge. Eventually, Eggman wonders where the Eclipse cannon is, and a little padding later, Gerald says it's right here. He ends up combining the keys, which eventually makes a higher pitched sound and quakes the building. Shadow walks towards the large hole that had been blasted into the floor and out along the skyline of the city. And after some pointless narration, the water of the river ahead of him opens up like a giant sinkhole. And what arose in its center at some point reveals itself to be a giant black satellite rocket. And eventually Shadow gets warped away, relatably thinking that it's unnerving when someone else warps him. This was new. He soon regains solid form, and from the black bay window in front of him, he sees that he's standing on the bridge of the Eclipse Cannon's ship, looking up at the ruined gun building he'd just been in with Robotniks near him. So them getting warped here was new. Gerald thinks this is his masterpiece as I think about how less cool it is to have the Eclipse Cannon on Earth. Although it is more believable that 50 years ago they would have made the Eclipse Cannon and had the Ark here. Why was there a space colony 50 years ago with artificial gravity and oxygen? Well, because Sonic's universe is in the future. Somehow they missed that. A bunch of time's wasted after this some more, like Gerald revealing some matching red spacesuits from a hidden compartment. Eventually Eggman gets a call from Agent Stone, who eventually starts trying to warn him that based on something Shadow said, there's more to Gerald's plan than he's aware. So why did he wait so long to tell him that, if it's been so long since he's been with Shadow? But the writer forced them to not instantly explain himself, not that he would really believe him anyways. But because of this, feels like there's forced drama where Eggman wanted him for a while and ends up cutting contact with him because he'd rather side with a family member he just met. It's always just annoying when forced incompetence is the only source of drama. Shadow somehow feels sorry for Stone, even though he thought bullying innocent people was fine, because it really wants you to like a bully. After a bunch of padding, during which Eggman says he was in the orphanage earlier, and Joe cathartically tells him it's time to further the plot when he was having a pity me speech. Although I hate that he says plot, Gerald has cringy dialogue where he says to stick that MacGuffin in the hole. I hope that was just from the book. I have a hard time believing he'd know what the term MacGuffin meant. Gerald and cringy dialogue reminds me that I was told that in the film, he expressed verbal shock at a woman in the military. It's realistic because of how old Gerald is. But since even modern day in the movies is slightly more advanced than the present, you have to believe it's only very slightly ahead of us in time to justify Gerald's generation being from such old times. My point is, since that line of his was a joke people liked, I don't know why that was censored out of the book. A few people were clutching their pearls at that line because they were being mean to a game character, but he's an old man. Eventually, the turn of the key causes the spaceship they're in to launch into space. So surprisingly, the end of the story does take place in space after all. Then what was the point of the lab shadows in not being in space and the Eclipse cannon not being in space? They can still afford it. There's a lot of padding after this. No random human has a chance against Knuckles. I'm not interested in him tackling them and bragging about it. At least he says he refused to batter them because he's noble. But why is he in a good mood after Tom got hurt? Well, as it turns out, he doesn't even know Tom got hurt. Part of that narration is recapping Knuckles used to be Sonic's enemy, like we would have forgotten. Eventually, after Maddie follows Tom into the ambulance, Sonic smartly says they have to destroy the Robotniks finally, and naturally thinks there's only one way to do it now. But after some padding where Sonic and Knuckles argue with each other because somehow, even after what happened to Tom, Knuckles refuses to let him go super, even though his plan would keep him from making a beacon of salvation for humanity, which is clearly going to cause problems because he's evil. Sonic doesn't decide to fight him. I hate that the narration said Knuckles refused to believe that the Sonic he knew would be like this. Of course Sonic would get mad and be in a bad mood because of someone he really loved almost dying, and being in a condition where he might die. Do you really think that in the games, if Tails nearly died, Sonic wouldn't be in a bad mood and want revenge after that? Of course he would, because he cares about Tails. Of course it's implying that he's not literally pure good. That's how he's supposed to be though. He's not about principles. He does what he wants. I hate that Tails isn't on Sonic's side for this. So much for him being his loyal fanboy. The scene went on too long. But Knuckles has a point that Sonic shouldn't try to go super when he's mad. So what? He's only gonna abuse it on bad guys. Who cares? Eventually, Knuckles says he gave the emerald to a trusted ally he trained. So of course they figure out he gave it to Wade because that's what the Knuckles show established. Knuckles wouldn't tell him where he hid the emerald at a time like this. He wouldn't even take the risk of saying he gave it to a trusted ally. This is almost as bad as, I'll never tell you what I'm telling you. Like, at a time like this, making him a goofball is kind of tonally dissonant. Sonic runs across the ocean, and eventually after a warp ring as the other heroes get to where Wade works, after some padding, Sonic sees Wade playing air hockey with the Master Emerald. So more time is blatantly wasted by Sonic asking for the emerald and taking it effortlessly. Although for some reason Wade didn't just immediately give it to him. But I like that he has faith in him to just do the right thing with it. And when he goes super, a dark cloud appears on the horizon before he flies up to space. It could have changed things up by having more than just Sonic go super. If Tails was in character, he would have as well. It hadn't been said that the heroes had a way to get to space that he knew of. So Knuckles shouldn't have blamed him for wanting to stop the bad guys. There's a bunch of pointless narration after this that reminds me of stuff I already know, trying to suck the excitement out of this. Wild Sonic's power increased alongside his rage. So eventually Super Sonic goes to fight Shadow in space. And at some point it involves them fighting robots that are weak, so who cares? Sonic X already had them fight in super forms in space, so this does nothing new and impressive. Oh yeah, Shadow just absorbed his superpower. That's something he can do now, so that's why Shadow was super. I've also heard that in the movie itself they start up Live and Learn, but stop it when it cuts to Eggman's fight with Gerald and then restart the song and never play all of its lyrics. So it did the fan service wrong. How do you do that? Eventually, after Shadow guilts Sonic that a so-called hero left his friends behind to fight him, They both see the stars over the moon, and so Shadow mentions Maria saw him with him. And so Sonic talks Shadow into being good, just like Archie did in narration. Well, it's half Sonic talking him into it and half Maria talking him into it. Because he remembers Maria saying that the light from a star stays there long after it's gone. All this is sandwiched between a lot of padding, by the way. When Sonic X took away Amy making Shadow good, people were livid. But a live-action Sonic movie can do whatever it wants because everyone decided to stand for these movies. I hardly care about this, but anyone who doesn't think it's a problem that Amy got cheated out of her best moment here doesn't really care about Amy, and was only complaining about Sonic X for the sake of complaining about it. Which I approve of, but I don't understand not applying that to this too. And when Eggman finds out Gerald wanted to destroy the world, he has a lame fight with him involving a slap fight and Gerald spanking him. When in the deleted scene they had laser gloves and stuff, so it was actually cool. Until Eggman eventually throws Gerald into a bunch of chaos energy to kill him, which is cool for Eggman but anticlimactic for Gerald. And then he tells Stone he's his friend and surprisingly decides to sacrifice himself to save the world by manually controlling the Eclipse cannon while Shadow and Sonic push it away from the Earth. At least him sacrificing himself is creative, but it's ridiculously out of character for someone whose whole character is that he's selfish and arrogant and extremely misanthropic. When Eggman plans on sacrificing himself, he says a bunch of lame things. One of which is complimenting the way he makes his lattes, so that's nice. And one of which is that this will be his final live stream, which is not only lame and tonally dissonant, but confused people who saw the film itself because it kept any mention of him live streaming to the deleted scenes. I know I went through the rest of the plot pretty fast, but surrounding all of that is a gigantic amount of boring padding ranging from dialogue I don't like to nothing happening, or the same things happening that already did. I'm sure CinemaSins did a video on this movie, so just watch that if you want anything I missed. The story also ends up revealing that the exact way Maria died was changed in the film. I understand why they did it, they had to make it shocking all over again. Because Sonic fans were actually cheering at seeing her get shot in the Sonic Symphony. So that's why the filmmakers decided to do something new. All that matters in the epilogue is that it turns out Tom survives. Big surprise. And Amy saves Sonic from a bunch of Metal Sonics. Which makes me and a lot of people worry that she's going to be exactly the opposite of how Amy is. A so-called girl boss. It wouldn't be so bad if she had a crossbow, because then it would be referencing Fleetway Amy where she was also like that and they did it right. If you read the entirety of this book to the end, you'll find out exactly what I was the most pissed off about with this novel specifically, and why I rushed through the end of it so fast. It's something that I should have warned people about in the title before they bought it.